Hello, my name is Christopher Covert, and I've chosen to do the history of aviation propulsion for my speech. Now, since the inception of our aviation industry, you have to actually put it in the air and power it. And some of our early pioneers in propulsion and aviation allowed us to do that. A couple of examples are Octave Chanute. He was a railroad engineer who was born in Paris, and he summarized all the technical accomplishments of aviation in 1894. There was Glenn Curtiss. He did the first ever naval takeoff on a ship. There was Wilbur and Orville Wright. Obviously, they flew the first airplane in 1903. Hans von Ohain, he designed and built the first jet engine, HE-187. There was Sir Frank Whittle, and he provided some major accomplishments and patented the first jet engine. Now, the first flight had to have three very separate and distinct things to be considered controlled, or to be considered flight. It had to be sustained, had to be powered, and it had to be controlled of a craft that was heavier than air. And it was powered by a 4-cylinder, 12-horsepower piston-driven engine that was designed and built by Wilbur and Orville Wright, and also with the help of a friend of theirs. Now, piston motors would rule the skies until the early 1940s, and that's when gas jet engine turbine motors would take over. Now, some of the pros and cons to piston engines are they were restricted altitude, they had excessive vibration, they weren't very efficient, and they weren't very reliable. But the pro was their only asset that was available at the time. Now, during the change of times, Europe led the pack with Germany in the lead in the early 1940s with Hans von Ohain, and America was a little bit slower to follow with the help of the British government. But with that, we designed and built the GE-1A, which is a very, very early design of a jet engine. Now, the early jet engines, they lacked thrust, and due to they had a centrifugal style jet engine that was limited to compression ratios. But some of the pros were they were lightweight, they were simple, and they were very cost effective. Now, later jet engines drew in the axial flow annular combustion style combustion chambers, and I'll give you a couple examples of them. The earlier jet engines were all turbojet, and they were a single spool. And a good example of this would be the J58, which was powered this SR-71 Blackbird. There's a turbofan, an F100 that powers the F-15 to this current day, and then a turbo shaft, a T56, which powers a C-130. Some of the pros and cons to the current jet engine design are they're heavier design, they cost a lot more, they're more prone to foreign object damage or FOD, but some of the pros are they provide an enormous amount of power, and they have the ability to compress air at much higher ratios. Well, with this, the conclusion states that from the early morning of the Kitty Hawk in North Carolina to the massive GE90 high bypass engine, the propulsion industry has benefited from great pioneers, mechanics, engineers, and end-item users. Now, this is just one example of how our human race continues to grow and change. With that, that was my speech.